and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg, as usual, proudly powered by Research Luxembourg and recording at the Media Center of the University of Luxembourg. And in today's show, we have three guests that are going to talk about mainly, but not only, the Chronopilot project that they are on together. And we start with Argiro Vatakis, who is an experimental psychologist and associate professor for the psychology department at Panteion University of Social and Political Sciences and director of the Multisensory and Temporal Processing Laboratory. And then we have Jean Botev, who has a background in computer science and media studies and is a senior researcher working at the Department of Computer Science of the Faculty of Science, Technology and Medicine at the University of Luxembourg. He founded and leads the VR and AR lab at the university. And last but absolutely not least, we have Sahar Niknam, who has a bachelor's degree in robotics engineering. And after visiting a couple of master's degree programs in philosophy of science and creativity studies, she completed her master's studies in cognitive science with a focus on AI and VR. And she is a PhD student working on the Chronopilot project. Thank you very much for coming, all the three of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
It was a bit delayed, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Normally, the guests say thanks in the beginning, yes. But if you don't want to thank me, that's also fine. Hopefully, you thank at the end. That's the important thing. Okay, I did not mention, but of course, Argiro is based in Athens. We should say that. So we have a Greek person today joining. We've had quite a few Greek researchers, but nobody connecting straight from Greece. So I'm also very happy about that. And now we move on to the Chronopilot project first. So it is a fascinating collaboration for me, and I want to start just to understand what it is about and what are you doing. And I have a question to Jean, of course. Can you just introduce us in 3 sentences, if possible, what the project is about?
I think that the name captures us pretty well. It's essentially we want to navigate time. And what this refers to is the subjective time perception in people. And we want to pilot and alter that subjective time perception. So we want to find ways of changing how you perceive time, whether it passes slow or fast. It's an FET open project, which means that it's a very kind of visionary type of idea. And there's a lot of fundamental research that goes on here, and it's a multidisciplinary project that involves all kinds of different disciplines, from cognitive science to us as computer scientists, but we also have roboticists, modelers, a group that specializes in haptics, because it's a complex issue.
Oh, yes, definitely. So today, of course, we are not going to discuss all the different sides, but the ones that you specialize in, but it's good that you mention it because it's important. And I have to ask you, RG, is it still the case that when you say to people that, okay, I look at time and time perception and changing the time perception, the people say like, come on, you can't change it. It's not subjective, it's set. You still get that comments, or this is already a well-known knowledge that everybody knows it's possible?
Comments vary. So some people might say, why does time exist? And I'm like, I'm studying time perception. And in some other cases, which is most of the cases, they're like, yes, I always feel my time messed up when I'm bored or when I'm having fun. How come this happens? So most of the people talk about their time perception in terms of long intervals of time and not very short.
And you're looking more at the short ones?
Most of the times our research focuses on the short ones with an impact to the long ones, but mostly the short ones.
Okay, so let's start with the basic. What actually influences our time perception?
Oh, so many things. So timing is tightly interconnected with various cognitive processes and biological states. So, for instance, if you're experiencing a high load due to a difficult task, which has impact on your physical state and your mental state, those things might change your time. If you're happy or very busy, those things might change your time. So time, even though we're really good at being, at perceiving time, it's very malleable. It can change based on many different factors. So there's not one single one, but many different ways to modulate time.
And on top of it, we can modulate it with VR. At least you're trying to prove that, right? And there is something that you're working on that I found very interesting. So we're talking about this chronopilot device. So the idea is that people will use the device and actually feel different time passing, shorter, longer. Am I getting it right or not, Sahar? Yes? Yes. So how does it work? I mean, it's the classic VR thing. I put the glasses on and then I feel, well, what do I feel? What I was supposed to actually participate in one of the demos that you've been doing and I never did. So that's bad on me. So please try now, if possible, explain to me, what are you trying to develop?
So all the stimulus that we are using in a non-VR environment could be done also in VR. So nothing magical there. But my research is especially focused on using the environment in VR for changing time perception, because we have all possible technologies to change the environment in VR that we don't have in real world. So in real world, the environment is pretty stable and you can change it in real time. But in VR, you can change the whole building that you are sitting in matter of seconds. So that makes us very powerful in using stimulus for changing time perception.
My main problem is that I tried VR just a couple of times because I have huge balance problems and everything. So I get vertigo if I'm on a swing. So this is really, I'm not, unfortunately, the addressee yet, I guess. But I have to ask, VR as it is right now, do you think it's going to develop that even people like me are going to use it on a daily basis, or we are going to be excluded?
So, we're working hard in including everyone. There is a small fraction of the population that, gets sick even watching movies. That can't be corrected. But let's say the hardware manufacturers and also the developers, they try everything to avoid motion sickness or VR sickness. And that's also what we do in Chronopilot. However, those changes that Sahar mentioned, they don't have to be that eclatant that we are spinning you around, can be very subtle. And the advantage of VR is that we have full control over the environment. That's why we actually begin with VR and we move towards a kind of more mediated or mixed reality scenario later, where you are outside and you might see the real world and we play out other digital content on top of this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be VR, the Chronopilot device that you were mentioning. It's just we begin with this because we have full control.
But then it moves to, I guess, also using some kind of AR in it. And I'm leading to it because it's one of the things that people still get wrong, which is very surprising to me, but they still do. What is actually the difference between VR and AR?
Okay, so VR is when you experience a fully computer-generated environment and you're engulfed in it. And augmented reality or mixed reality is when you have parts of reality. Actually, in terms of augmented reality, it's mostly augmented reality. And then there's additional digital content and digital objects played out to you. So it's a mix. That is a little more difficult in terms of control because, as Sahar also said, we cannot control reality fully. So we call it a noisy environment. So there's more things prone to go wrong there. And in VR, again, it's fully computer simulated, which means that we can trick you more even.
This is fascinating. Noisy environment for you. Archie, what do you say to that as a psychologist? The reality is noisy environment.
Actually, for basic researchers like I am, indeed, reality is full of noise. So it kind of depends on the type of research you do, right? So even for me that I'm a psychologist and like to study humans in their natural world, our labs are usually very isolated, quiet, and dark. So we don't like the noise. We don't want that extra complexity in our experiments. And when we finally go to real world experiments, we really have to limit ourselves in all the confounding variables that can be around in order to run our study. So yeah, it totally depends on who you're talking to in terms of noisy environments.
Okay, this is a very good point also because, you need to look for correlations and causation, whatever. And especially when we talk about senses, it is very difficult, I guess, to just say, okay, this is just this sense and not that sense. Is it actually possible to really be 100% sure in this case?
Yeah, so like in a multisensory perception, we say that there is no unisensory event. We experience our world in a multisensory way, even though we might not be aware of it. So, for instance, we have proprioception and vestibular senses that are on all the time. So even if you just say it's just a visual stimulus, you still have other modalities on. So truly unisensory environments do not exist unless you are in a specifically designed experiment that blocks all the other senses, which we don't usually do. So we truly live in a multisensory world.
But then would you also argue that VR kind of blocks some of the senses for us or not, Jean? Do you think?
I wouldn't say block. The way VR works right now is that we cannot address all the senses that are there. In an ideal world, we would be able to play out all this kind of stimuli. Obviously, as you know, you mentioned that you were wearing a headset. So the visual sense is the primary sense that we use. Then we have auditory as the second channel. And haptics is also a very powerful channel. And this is why we focus in Chronopilot, for instance, on those three modalities. But I have colleagues that, for instance, focus or do research on olfaction, gustatory senses, etc. And the general idea also from the beginning is to engulf you and be really multisensory. So technically, yes, we are kind of blocking some senses, but it's not really blocking them. It's simply we don't actively address them. But as also Argy said, even if we show you something, you might feel motion sickness, which is vestibular, and other effects.
Yeah, but we don't need to block them in VR. We just need to keep them constant, which is not possible in actual world.
I was just wondering, Sahar, because as I said, I've seen you in different places with the headset and I never kind of approached. What were you doing there? Were you collecting data for the project also from people? Like what is this part of you going around places?
So we are collecting physiological data in VR environments, controlled environments, and try to find if we can see a correlation between these physiological data, including EEG, including heartbeat, including eye tracking, pupil dilation, and we can somehow map it to the way that people perceive time, whether they feel time is passing fast or slow. As soon as we can find it, then we have a control and we have some sort of measurement over time perception, and we can use it for modulating time perception whenever it's necessary.
Okay, so we say physiological data. So, Argy, question to you. Do we already know what time perception is more influenced by? Is it physiological conditions, cognitive part, or maybe emotional state? Is there something that is kind of more percentage-wise important in this case?
I would say all those possible cases are potential time modulators. We study a lot cognition in terms of attention, novelty, movement, emotion in many different senses because we want to understand how we perceive time. So there is this focus on cognitive processes and how those modulate our timing. But there's also all the work that focused on how our physiological states, like temperature in the body, or do I have fever or not, that also looked at how time can be modulated by this state. More recently, there's some but limited studies that want to see how intense exercise, so again, physio-related issues affect timing, but the knowledge is quite limited yet. And also in terms of physiological states, meaning heart rate, temperature, or skin conductance, in relation to timing, there's not much work. There's some work dealing with heart and heart rate variability, but not a lot of work in terms of changes in temperature or changes in skin conductance. And Chronopilot project has been collecting lots of data on physio and timing, because there you can have both ways in interaction, how your physiological state affects timing, but also how your cognitive or emotional state affects your physio, which in turn affects timing, or all other possible combinations. So we're hoping through Chronopilot to have more data that is missing in the literature in terms of the effects of physio on timing.
So we're talking about data. So I have to ask, I get it, heart rate, you get a very clear data, whatever. What about actually data on time perception? How do you measure time perception, Sahar?
There are a couple of ways, standard ways for measuring time perception in terms of like qualitative data. So we have verbal estimation. There's an event. We ask participants to estimate the duration in terms of seconds or minutes or something. Then we have production tasks. So participants observe something happening and they have to do some motor action like pressing a button for as long as they saw the stimuli or the event. And there's also reproduction tasks.
So when you see an interval without knowing its duration and you have to reproduce it by pressing a button.
Yes, but for production is you have been...
I give you the time.
Yes, exactly. Quantitatively, you have the time and then you press a button, for example, for as long as you believe that that duration will last. But they're all self-report. They are also somehow unreliable. So that's the reason that we start collecting EEG data to make sure, to see if we can actually measure time perception objectively without the participant being involved in estimating something, so not being prone to many biases that a participant couldn't have.
But EEG data objectively, so what is in the EEG that tells you that it's objective time perception is like that or different?
When we collected EEG data and we have this estimation, verbal estimation by participants, and then we divided the data samples that we have into 3 categories: accurate estimation, overestimation, so they perceive time longer than the actual objective duration, and underestimation, they perceived it shorter than actual. And then we also collected EEG data during the events. And then we saw that we could observe some signatures in data samples, very clearly mapping to the 3 categories.
I was just thinking that we should have today for the podcast, covered the time passing and then do like a verbal perception of the 3 of you. What do you think? Was it a long podcast or a short podcast? Just to show, Hopefully I'm working on it, that you will feel that it was a breeze and that you're not bored. And our listeners are not either, because this is also very, very important. Okay, we're talking time perception a lot, and we are talking about stimulating the time perception, and we have all the different senses. So you mentioned it a little bit, Jean, already, but I still want to understand. So which senses can we actually use to modulate time perception?
So again, in the project, we use auditory, visual, and haptic stimuli, and they can be combined as well in order to, for instance, induce attention, right? To focus your attention on something. And these are all things that, as Argiro also said, are kind of fundamental cognitive science. And the great thing about VR is that, in a nutshell, everything that works in reality also works in VR, or even better. So we are reproducing those, gathering the data, verifying that it's working. And we spent a large part of the early stage of the project in verifying individual stimuli. That means, like, for instance, a visual stimulus, an auditory stimulus, and then also combining them into audiovisual and see if that at least works the same way or even enhances. And so we're building this, if you like, library of stimuli that we can play out and that we know of that will either compress or prolong your time perception. So it's a kind of toolkit that ominous device eventually might be automatically playing out to you.
Okay, but we are not over-promising, right? There's still time for that. Whenever there is a bit of fundamental science involved and such an interdisciplinary field, I always am afraid that someone will say, well, that's so science fiction. But it's important to say, no, this is science. We are trying to actually get to a point that is going to happen, right? Because it does sound to a person who is not a specialist a bit, whoa, I don't know, Matrix type of thing. Sorry, I should not be mentioning Matrix probably, but still. Okay, we talked modulating time, and I was just also wondering, when it comes to performance, RG, can we modulate time to get better performance? Is it related? Does it increase performance or not?
So that's the premise of Chronopilot, right? So Chronopilot's aim is to modulate timing in order to increase your well-being and increase your performance in any task you might be involved with. So there are the reports during near-death experiences where people will say that their time slowed down. And during that time, they were better able to react to stimuli and finally save themselves or save others. However, attempts to replicate that in the lab haven't been very successful to induce this a near-death experience or this high stressful condition that would lead to this slowing down of time.
I guess ethically it's also a bit difficult, right?
Yeah. Yes. There are actually some nice attempts by David Eagleman's team in the US that try to create these alerting situations by having people fall off very safely a very high height while being tied and falling into a net. So there's ways to do it that are ethical, but still it's not exactly that near-death experience. So there's these reports by people, but there are also some limited attempts in the laboratory that have shown that during a cognitive task, when we modulate timing the way we aim to modulate it, either by speeding it up or slowing it down, that performance can increase. There's studies by Jones and colleagues or Woods and colleagues that have shown that during a particular state of time, expansion or compression, people are performing better, faster, or they're remembering better, or they're detecting a target much more accurately. Also, in our experiments in Chronopilot, we've been finding high correlations between some time modulations and performance. And there's also, of course, the literature that is looking at workload situations, but not always in terms of time perception, but in terms of workload and stress that are related, however, to time perception. So that is exactly the goal here in Chronopilot, to take all this wealth of knowledge and kind of combine it with the aim of increasing performance, depending on the task. Of course, it's a high risk aim because the goal is to go to any task, any situation, and make it better. And that's why it's a high risk project, future emerging project.
Of course. And I'm just thinking that, again, my time perception is really bad because I realized that we've been talking a very long time and we didn't even ask the pub quiz questions yet, because I'm actually looking at the clock as well. It's not only my subjective time perception. So before we go actually to the application that you're thinking of and where you want to test it kind of more when it comes to performance and well-being, let's delve into the pub quiz questions. So, Jean, can I ask you first to ask the question, and listeners, remember, answer only at the end, and then Argy will go next.
Right. So my question, if you like, from the VIR lab at the University of Luxembourg would be how old the concept of virtual reality or VR as we know it today is.
Okay, so that's one question. So we have a bit of time, but in the sense of dates. And then we have Argy's question. So what is yours?
So mine has to be responded in very few words, okay? What can you do to speed up your passage of time? And what can you do to slow it down?
Okay, great. And it was with a nice podcast voice, it's going to really work well. Okay, great. So coming back, as I said, of course, ideally, we want to apply it to the performance of all the people in the world and whatever, but you do have some use cases when you want to test whether it's going to work or not. There was some airports involved, if I'm not mistaken, some air control, traffic control or not.
There is. I'll pass on to Argy to answer this question because our Greek colleagues were working with that scenario. But maybe to briefly chime in why you would want to do this.
Exactly.
Right, to change your time in any situation. I can give you a very, very kind of straightforward example. Just imagine you're in a waiting room at the doctor's and time drags on while you're just, there's nothing to do. Maybe your mobile phone is not working even.
I forgot my book. That's my main problem.
Exactly. But that's a typical situation where you wish that time speeds up. But then there's situations like when you meet with friends, for instance, and then time passes in a snap and you wish that time would be longer, right? So it would be nice if we could decelerate that situation. So these are uncritical situations, but this is kind of a typical examples for when we would like to change our time perception. And then passing on to Argy, air traffic controllers is obviously when we have a kind of critical component and some danger, because if they have to do too much cognitively, then we're talking about potential accidents, potential death. Here you go.
Yeah, so there are situations like working in an air traffic control tower, which are critical for many lives, right? And expensive equipment, but we mostly care about human lives, right? We wanted to see if experiencing high or low load can affect the perceived time in air traffic controllers. So basically, we collaborated with a base here in Greece, and we had expert air traffic controllers that had experience for a very long time controlling one or more helicopters. So one is a low load situation versus controlling many helicopters is high load situation. And also they were giving their orders to the pilots either by their native language or their non-native language, having again the non-native situation as being loading a high load situation. And basically we wanted to see how their time is changed, and basically their experiencing time expansion when cognitively loaded, as opposed to cases of lower cognitive load where time was passing much faster. So it's an example of how high load can affect our timing and how we can use timing to measure one's load in a situation like air traffic control.
And the idea later on would be to actually give them a device that increases their performance somehow.
If you call acting safely increasing the performance, yes. So, if there's 100 planes coming in and you're stressed.
I'm putting emphasis on this performance factor because I think it's important that in our day and age, when we say performance, we're thinking already, basically reaching the roof when it comes to how much we need to do. Right? So I think for many people, when you say performance, they think, oh God, I will have to do even more. And that's not the thing, right? It's about acting safely, about counteracting this load and being able to take correct decisions, right? So not performance in the sense of doing more, but doing it better, right?
Yes. It's actually connected to what we know as flow state. And if we like something, for instance, if we have a hobby and we really get absorbed in it, time passes like a snap. And things just also, they don't feel like it's a lot to do, right? So this kind of flow state, when you have to juggle a lot of input, is obviously ideal because it's the contrary of, having to do more and feeling stress. It's actually alleviating you from that. So you perform better, but you feel better as well. So...
Yes, totally. And it's great you mentioned the flow state. So I have to ask Sahar this time for flow state. Looking at all the things you've done in life, actually, is VR the thing that just, makes you think that the time passes very quickly, or something else, some creative part?
So VR in general actually make you feel time passing faster. That's for sure. But for me, VR is really interesting because it can modulate any sort of perception. It could make you doubt about your body. So that's the part that the brain hack part of VR is something that I'm really interested in.
Oh, yes, totally. And it actually reminds me, Argy, of some of the psychological tests or different, as she called it, brain hacks that you can do even without VR, right? So we have all those illusions that totally everyone will fall into, right?
Yes, we love playing with people's heads. In my lab, we are always participating in science events, using multisensory illusions as one gets to see that the reality is not what they really think it is. So we use a lot audition and vision. We do also lots of experimentation with proprioception and vestibular, but the most fun, even for little kids, are the illusions that have to do with color and taste, or sound and taste, because they get to eat something, but at the same time they get surprised that what they're tasting is not what they really think it is, but something else. So yeah, illusions is a great way to learn about the brain, and also learn how reality is not really what you think it is.
But it's actually something that really got me interested. So I was stalking you a little bit. I went to your YouTube channel. Unfortunately, it was all in Greek, but the titles sometimes were in English. So then I could actually Wikipedia it and get to know what maybe you're saying there, but maybe not. But at least I got some illusions from there. And actually, could you tell me, because yes, I can't participate in science events in Greece, at least not now. How does color influence taste? Like, what do you mean? How does it work?
One thing we have in multisensory perception, and especially I'm very adamant about it, is that vision is not the dominant sense. It depends on the task, right? So even though we know a lot about vision because we studied it more, and the other senses can dominate it, and depending on the situation or the task. Most of the demos that we have in terms of taste, when you combine it with sound or when you combine it with color, usually the sound or the color kind of wins in quotes, basically confuses our taste. We can make something taste sweeter by just showing a different color. Usually, for instance, if we combine fairly neutral tea drink, iced tea or whatever, you can put in front of the participant just a screen or a piece of paper that has orange color or yellow color. And depending on what color they're looking at while they're tasting the neutral tasting tea, they think they taste something that is the taste of orange when it's orange, and lemony or sour when they're looking at yellow, for example. With sound, it's also very nice because you can make something taste fresh or old and not very pleasant. Depending on the sound, you can be either feeding the sound back to the participants where they're chewing and putting up, increasing a little bit decibels or decreasing it, or even you can utilize unrelated noise stimulation that has high or low loudness, and participants think indeed that the chip that they're tasting, it's fresh and very tasty versus old and I don't want to eat anymore. So they're quite fun, yes, and malleable.
I'm already thinking that I'm going to sit my kids in some colors so they enjoy the food I prepare, maybe. I don't know if that will help, though, but still, it's a very interesting point. Absolutely to be tested, although probably in many psychological tests, we always have to say, don't try it at home. So I don't know, but in this case, just to say it, just in case someone is already preparing that for sure. And of course, we can't always try at home VR and AR. Not everybody has access to all the different possibilities for apps. With AR, I guess more, but VR, not everyone has all the headsets, and they are changing as well. And also, just to summarize a little bit the VR, AR space, what do you think? What is the next best thing or the most important thing that is coming? The technology is going really, really fast. There are many changes. Of course, there are different announcements from companies of new, amazing things that are definitely better than anything else. So do you think, Jean, it's more about the hardware that we're going to get? Is it more about the software? Is it the adaptation of the metaverse? Or what is it that actually we should be looking into?
Yeah, so first of all, it's actually a bit of everything that you mentioned. So hard and software usually go together. Ultimately, the goal is to not make you notice that you are in VR or experience AR. It has to be as natural as possible. So what we have right now is what we can do right now. So this is the best we can do. We have this head-mounted displays in VR simply because we want to engulf you fully. So we have to isolate the remainder of your optical input, let's say. However, as you said, it is in a way prominent. So there's companies that put a lot of money in it now. There's new hardware coming out all the time. But augmented reality already is omnipresent. It's a type of augmented reality that we usually consume through smartphones. So we're using our smartphones and the cameras that are in there to look through the screen and see reality differently. Right? And on the screen, we have the augmentation there. And just think of navigation systems. Right? This is already augmented reality, and everybody's using it. So it is already there. It's not the future, but the way we perceive it will change. So it will become more natural. You might wear your normal glasses or sunglasses. It might be not discernible, but you get all this kind of overlaid information. But again, we're working towards making it feel really natural so that you are neither affected negatively as somebody that is in front of the one that is wearing the augmented reality technology, nor when you yourself wear it. So it has to be safe, but it has to feel natural and be useful. And as you said, a lot of companies are doing research and releasing products, but the rulebook is just written, and hopefully we will find really nice use cases where the technology is used for the better. And navigation is one of them, for instance, that if you see where to go or you feel where to go without interfering with safety, for instance, that's already a clear plus. And we will find lots of these ways where you get extra information and it just integrates well.
Oh, we get some mind hacks, additional ones for Sahar. I can see you get excited because, that's the thing that for me, again, layperson perspective, VR is education and entertainment right now, because exactly I don't perceive it. Probably I don't realize that it's somewhere else too. Is it? So we have navigation. Where else do we see it coming, or it's already there, Sahar?
I just realized, it is not a new feature, but I just saw it on my online shopping app, that you can select an item, and for making sure that it is what you want, you can put your phone on register a surface and have the object as augmented object on your table, for example, and see and have a look around and stuff and make sure that you want it. So it is actually happening.
Okay, great. So this is, again, the consumerism that is coming in, obviously, just to sell more, right? I had a discussion with some researchers from Least. They are developing, technologies that would allow you to exactly feel by touching, right, the material, right? So you can go and really without going to the shop, which is exciting for me. I hate going to shops. So if I can do it online, that's definitely better. But I was just wondering, Argy, when you're, a psychologist meeting VR people, we already said that you agree that noisy environment is in both cases, but how difficult it is for you to talk to them, actually? Because it's such a different world, right? We're talking humanities and IT specialists, and Jean is already shaking his head. The listeners can't see it, that he doesn't agree. What do you think about it?
I love multidisciplinarity. So even in the lab, we have biologists, mathematicians, dancers, because I think true innovation comes from the mixing of various disciplines and lead to nice creative projects like Chronopilot, for example. The difficult part is to find a common language. For instance, some people might use sense in a different way that psychologists do. So once you just communicate and find that common language, and if you view it positively, like I want to collaborate, so I'm gonna try to understand, then everything else I think you can overcome quite easily. So I prefer working with multiple different disciplines rather than limiting myself in the same discipline in terms of creating stuff, especially when you want to see your basic research going towards a real world application, or even in the cases where we want to induce situations that we cannot do it in real life, like real driving situations. We cannot create whatever conditions we want in a real driving situation. That will be totally dangerous, but you can do that in a VR world or AR world. In addition, and just to add to the previous conversation, as you can use VR for the benefit of your science. For instance, you can use VR to immerse people in a situation that will take them away from what they're experiencing right now, like pain during burn victims, and they need to get changed and the pain is too high. You can immerse them in situations and they won't even feel the same pain they were feeling before. Lots of work has been going on with cancer patients and chemotherapy. So I think not trying or not actively collaborating with other disciplines and scientists that work with VR or AR is just a mistake, I think.
Yeah, so that's actually why I was laughing at the beginning, because VR, specifically my lab, we both have psychologists, employ them, but we collaborate also in other projects with them, because one of the applications that you were asking for that go beyond education or gaming is actually therapy. And therapeutic applications are, as Argy said, like one of the central applications right now for VR, because you can expose people to situations or visual stimuli that otherwise would be very difficult to replicate or dangerous, right? So it's a fully controlled environment, and it's actively used already in therapy. It's not just research. And we are, for instance, also working with a colleague from psychology on body image. So we can change the way you look in VR so as to affect how you feel about your body in real life, because it's very immersive. And so there is an effect, but obviously we cannot do this in real life, And so that's why I was laughing, because yes, it's true. Like in any multidisciplinary project, you have to find a common language. But especially everyone that I work with, we really, after this initial finding the vocabulary, we collaborate very well. And it's really the joy of it.
Yes, it's brilliant to kind of wrap up our discussion, I think. And it just also comes to the respect towards other disciplines. In one of the episodes, I had a very interesting discussion about a project that was very multidisciplinary as well. And one of the biggest challenges was to understand the significance. Because, of course, if you cross from computer science to history, there is a tendency to kind of not perceive the significance of the work the same way, right? So it's very also important to kind of put yourself in the shoes and see that maybe if it's not a number that is a result, like we were discussing before, this is also significant within the realm of the research. So I think we can finish with that and only solve the pub quiz questions that we asked a couple of minutes ago. A long time ago, in my perception at least. Okay, let's start with Argy this time. So what was your question and what's the answer? It was supposed to be short answer, as I remember.
Very short. So the question was, what can you do to speed up your passage of time, and what can you do to slow it down? So in terms of the speeding up, we can develop a routine. So the quick response is routine. And to slow it down, as another quick response is new experiences. So new experiences will definitely slow your time down and make you feel it longer. And maybe, Hannah, you felt that is longer because you learned so much during this postcard.
This is very possible, absolutely. I wanted to play it back to you actually for the routine part, right? Because this is always very interesting to me when you have researchers who actually have direct application to their lives. So do you actually go for new experiences every day, Argy, or do you have a lot of routine in your life now that you know it all?
It's routine for me. Well, it was very useful during COVID period, right? Having a routine, but it was the same before and after. So it's just when you're done with your responsibility with the kids, then you just sit in front of the laptop and work all day until you get your kids and go to that routine. So for me, it's routine. It speeds up my passage of time, but I'm okay with it.
Okay, that's good. Going back to you, Jean. So what was the question and what's the answer? Unless you want to comment on the routine and the experiences.
I think I'll skip that and I'll just go right to the question. So my question was, how old is the concept of virtual reality as we know it today? And the answer would be that it's probably older than most people think. It dates back nearly a century ago. So the idea at least started manifesting in the 1930s in science fiction literature, and with surprisingly detailed descriptions. But head-mounted displays and the hardware that we use today also originated only shortly after, even in the 50s. So the first prototypes, for instance, Maude Heilig's telesphere mask, that was at the end of the 50s. And also the term virtual reality was coined in the 1950s in the context of computer science. So it's probably much older than people think. And it's just that now we have the technology, it's miniaturized enough so that we have all these products, but people tried every now and then. So in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, there were different waves. And now with the smartphones, our displays and computing power is so small that we can actually build those devices and wear them.
Okay, so very interesting. We went back in time a little bit and we also looked at our routines and experiences and everything. And what just remains is to thank you very much for today, for sharing all the fascinating work that you're doing, and good luck with the Chronopilot project. I will be definitely checking what is happening in the sphere and sharing if there is something in Luxembourg or maybe in Greece that people can participate in and understand better what is happening there. Thank you so much, Argi, Sahar, and Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
And this is it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, to see what we are writing on all the social media. Suggest guests, of course, or send your questions. This was Silax, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.